Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. I'm so glad you're tuning in, because right now, literally as we speak, there is a high-stakes, invisible battle happening right behind your drywall. Under your floors, out in your yard, it's this crazy, complex, hidden world of pressure, chemistry, and physics. And most of us just completely ignore it, right? Up until something goes terribly, terribly wrong.
So picture this. It is 2 a.m. You wake up and all you hear is the sound of rushing water. A pipe just bursts in your ceiling. Panic sets in. What on earth happens next? Well, to really understand how this unseen infrastructure actually works and how it fails, we're using a real-world case study for this explainer. We're looking at Silverline Plumbing over in Liberty, Missouri. Looking at their daily operations in this specific area gives us, honestly, the perfect window into the life cycle of your home's most critical system.
Okay, let's dive right into this and map out our roadmap. We've got 5 key areas to hit today. First, nature versus your pipes. Then, anatomy of a breakdown. Third, the plumber's strict rulebook. After that, the true cost of repairs. And finally, we'll settle the classic debate of DIY versus the professionals. All right, jumping right into Section 1, nature versus your pipes.
So Liberty, Missouri actually acts as this perfect microcosm for extreme environmental stress. Seasonal extremes are just a constant threat out there. Think about it. Your plumbing system isn't just sitting there holding water. It is actively fighting the environment 24/7. In the winter, temps regularly drop way below freezing. And since water expands when it freezes, pipes in those vulnerable, unheated crawl spaces, they literally crack wide open. Then spring rolls around, you get heavy rainfall that just completely overwhelms drainage systems, and the heavy clay soil shifts around, putting a ton of stress on underground water and sewer lines. Oh, and summer? The high humidity acts like an accelerator for corrosion, especially if you're dealing with those old galvanized pipes in historic homes.
But hey, the weather isn't the only bad guy here. The municipal water in Liberty is incredibly heavy in minerals. That stuff builds up inside water heaters and fixtures, totally slashing their lifespan. Or, if you're out on a rural well system, you're constantly battling sediment. And oh man, if you live down in historic downtown Liberty, those massive, beautiful old trees lining the streets, their roots are relentless. They're always hunting for moisture, and eventually they just invade and completely destroy aging cast iron sewer lines. It really is this perfect storm of invisible, daily damage. Moving on to Section 2, anatomy of a breakdown.
Okay, so we've established the environment is completely hostile. But exactly how your home's plumbing gives up the ghost, that depends entirely on its age and its location. Take an older home over near Stockstill Park, for instance. That system was probably put in decades ago. You're likely dealing with galvanized steel pipes that literally rust from the inside out. They choke off the water flow, you get those annoying pinhole leaks. It's a mess. But say you're in a brand new development east of I-35. You're not fighting rust, but you are probably dealing with builder-grade fixtures that just wear out and fail way before they should. Basically, every single era of construction has its own super-specific, totally predictable weakness.
So how do the local pros actually tackle these ultra-specific breakdowns? Well, they rely on a pretty strict 3-step operational process. First up is diagnosis and upfront pricing. This means finding the exact cause, sometimes running camera inspections right down the line, and getting written approval on the cost before a single wrench is even turned. Step 2 is the actual expert, code-compliant repair. And Step 3? Testing and final walkthrough. That's where they verify the water pressure, check for any sneaky leaks, and make absolutely sure everything is running perfectly before they head out. It's all about total transparency and rigorous testing. No shortcuts.
That brings us to Section 3, the plumber's strict rulebook.
Now, what's really interesting about this next part is the sheer mathematical precision involved. Plumbing is definitely not just snapping tubes together and hoping water flows through them. It is strictly bound by the rigid laws of physics and some incredibly strict local building codes. Take the 135-degree rule. This code demands that horizontal drain pipes slope between 1/4 and 1/2 inch for every foot. Why so specific? Well, if the pipe is too flat, water just sits there and causes clogs. But if it's too steep, the water rushes down too fast, outruns the solid waste, and just leaves all the gross stuff behind in your pipes. Professional plumbers literally use laser levels to nail this exact slope. It is that critical.
And then we have to talk about pressure, specifically 80 psi. In Liberty, the municipal water pressure usually hovers between 60 and 80. But if it creeps over that strict 80 psi maximum, local code actually mandates special pressure-reducing valves. If you don't have those installed, the sheer force of the incoming water will literally blow out your fixtures and appliances. Nobody wants that.
The rulebook also gets really specific about what materials are even allowed inside your home. And honestly, these codes evolved directly from past structural disasters. Look back before the 1970s, galvanized steel was the gold standard, right up until we figured out it severely corrodes internally. Then in the 1980s, polybutylene pipe became wildly popular, until it started failing prematurely and causing catastrophic water damage. And of course, fast forward to 1986, lead solder was officially banned across the board for obvious health reasons. So yeah, today's strict building codes, they're basically written in the ink of yesterday's massive failures.
All right, let's hit Section 4, the true cost of repairs.
So let's talk about money. It can be a bit taboo, but we need to break down the actual economics of hiring a pro to navigate all those complex codes. Around Liberty, a standard hourly rate for a plumber sits somewhere between $100 to $200 depending on when you call and how complex the job is. And on top of that, you're usually looking at a $75 to $150 call-out fee just to cover the trip and that initial diagnosis. Now, to a lot of folks, that sounds incredibly steep. But we really have to look at what that hourly rate actually pays for. You're not just handing over cash for an hour of someone's time. You are funding an immense amount of unseen overhead. That rate covers 24/7 emergency dispatch availability, so someone is actually there at 2 a.m. It funds massive service trucks, fully stocked with specialized parts for Liberty's specific housing styles, so they aren't running out to a supply store halfway through the job. It covers mandatory Missouri state licenses, heavy-duty insurance policies, and non-stop training to keep up with those building codes we just talked about. Basically, it's the true cost of getting a complex problem fixed correctly the very first time.
And you want it done right, because the alternative is just incredibly risky. Look, when it's 2 a.m. and water is literally raining down from your ceiling, scammers absolutely know you're vulnerable. So how do you spot a fake plumber who's just trying to exploit your emergency?
You really need to watch out for these major red flags. If they refuse to give you a written estimate before any work begins, huge red flag. If they use high-pressure tactics to force an immediate, super expensive replacement instead of even exploring a repair, run. Watch out for vague phrasing too, like if they just say, "Oh, I'll fix the pipe," instead of specifically explaining they need to replace a corroded shutoff valve. And obviously, if they demand cash only or refuse to show a physical Missouri plumbing license, do not hire them. And listen, here's a crucial pro tip straight from the source. Never, ever tell a contractor you're desperate, and definitely don't reveal your exact maximum budget up front, because a dishonest contractor will miraculously make sure the final bill hits that exact maximum number. Just don't do it.
This brings us to Section 5, DIY versus the professionals.
Knowing those high hourly rates, I totally get it. The temptation to just do it yourself is so strong. And to be totally fair, it is undeniably cheaper for the simple stuff. Replacing a clogged faucet aerator or maybe tightening up a loose supply line under the sink? Fantastic DIY projects. But the DIY cons absolutely dwarf the pros for anything beyond basic maintenance. You usually end up buying expensive, single-use tools that will just gather dust in your garage. You seriously risk massive code violations that will completely haunt you when it's time to sell your house. Oh, and pouring those harsh chemical cleaners down the sink? That often just eats away your pipes and actually makes the clog worse. At the end of the day, a single burst pipe from a botched DIY repair can easily rack up thousands of dollars in catastrophic water damage.
So the ultimate takeaway here is this. Proactive, professional inspections and regular preventative maintenance are always, and I mean always, cheaper than reactive emergency flood cleanup. Finding a tiny hidden leak during a routine check is what saves your walls, your floors, and, honestly, your sanity.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer. But before we wrap, I want to leave you with a quick thought. The very next time you turn on the tap to wash your hands or grab a glass of water, will you just see the water? Or are you going to think about the incredible, complex, heavily regulated, and fiercely maintained hidden battleground operating silently right behind your walls? Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep learning.